I'm your host, Russell, and today in the studio I have Brian from the Memory Hole Show. Hi, Brian.
Hey, how are you?
Not too bad. And I have Andy Lee from the Andy Lee Show here. Thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you for having me. It's going to be fun. I've got a lot of good stuff.
Oh man, it's these people. We're the misinformation. Yeah, but I think we're gonna reveal a few interesting facts today. But before we get started with that, I'll have you do a brief introduction. So we'll start with Brian. If you want to introduce yourself.
Hi, so my name's Brian from the Memory Hole Show. I just have a humble little podcast that I try to get my voice and the voice of the silent majority out. Really, not too complicated, just an everyday person.
Thanks, Brian. Andy, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, so I ran the last federal election. I covered the Freedom Convoy and, a lot of foreign corporate things like that. I like to look for the funding. It's sort of what I do. So I do a show with Mark Petroni from Saga 960 AM. Again, not, just sort of a concerned citizen, right? It's not a money-making machine or anything like that. So, it's just something that we put together, to try to inform people because I think we've had some massive failures in our media to inform people. So that's why I agreed to do the show today. I want to deconstruct this article and sort of show the funding and the agendas behind this and the people behind this. So anyways, let's just get to the article and then we can start talking about it.
Okay, great. So I have the article pulled up here. So this article is by Global News, Rachel Gilmore, and it's how podcasts have become misinformation machines and what can be done about it. So we won't go through line for line, but I think one of the key things they bring up right away in the article is that that because podcasting has become so popular, they're claiming that some of them have become machines for spreading misinformation. Experts on the subject warn. So podcasts are entertainment. People podcast for many different reasons, from sports to fashion to politics. And it's at the end of the day, it's entertainment. And you can choose whether or not you listen or move on to the next show. But there seems to be this idea that this industry needs some gatekeeping from the alleged fact checkers. So, what are your thoughts on that?
If I could jump in real quick, I mean, really, the mainstream media has had or has been the gatekeeper of information or misinformation, depending on how you look at it, for many, many years. And there's a reason why so many people are leaving watching mainstream media and going to shows like this or to blogs or other kinds of things, right? People desire to find the truth. And you can't necessarily find the truth from mainstream media anymore. They used to hold the government's feet to the fire, but they don't anymore. You know what I mean? That's kind of a problem.
Yeah. I mean, if I can jump in, I totally agree with that. I mean, that's why I'm here, right? I was here because I started looking for the truth. I don't believe that our mainstream media monopoly on the truth any longer. And so that's why, I think we're seeing more and more podcasters jump up because, people are searching for alternative news sources because there is intense distrust in the media right now. And, there's good reason for that. I'm not saying don't trust them altogether, right? There's good journalists out there. There's still people who do good work out there. But there are people who are putting out, propaganda style things. And the authors and the people quoted in this article are some of those people who have done it, right? I mean, Rachel Gilmore, I'm not going to say that all of her work is bad. She's done some good work, but she has done some harmful things, right? She spread the Ottawa arson hoax. She said that she knew the people who, were in that building personally and that they were good people. I'm sorry, they weren't good people. They propagated a hoax that was used to enact the Emergencies Act against protesters, and that was completely blown out of the water. It was disproved by myself and Jonathan Kay very, very quickly, and anybody who wanted to dig into it could have very easily disproven it. But she spread it. So she is part of the misinformation machine that she says that she's fighting against. And, I mean, that's been brought up in the Emergencies Act inquiry in the House of Commons. But, they're not responsible for some reason for, what they've done. And I mean, along the same lines, Justin Ling was responsible for saying that there were loaded guns found at the protests. So he was quoted in the article, right? He said that there were loaded guns found at the protest. Well, I'm sorry, there was never any loaded guns at the protest. He said that it was a tip from police. Nobody ever followed up on it. He was actually called out personally by MP Dean Lloyd several times on social media saying, where did you get this story from? Because again, this was a story that was used to by the Liberal government to say that the Emergencies Act was justified against protesters. So it's really, really dangerous. Like, it's not, when they do it, it wasn't benevolent, right? What happened, people had real world repercussions from these fake stories that were put out. And yeah, I mean, so, here's Western Standard saying there was no loaded guns found. But, they never had to answer for that. So, I mean, that's why, people like us are here looking for the real information, right? And looking to podcast it. And it's not the first time that this has happened. It's not unique to, it's not unique to the convoy. Like, I've looked at Press Progress a lot. Press Progress say that they're fact checkers, right? They're funded by the Broadbent Institute, it's NDP. Rag, they've put out a lot of things saying that they were going to fact check articles, right? So this was one that they did. Leslyn Lewis. Okay, so Conservative leadership candidate Leslyn Lewis claims Bill Gates is behind a plot against Canada. That's the headline. So this is Leslyn Lewis talking about the WHO pandemic treaty. So I came back to Press Progress and I said, Press, did you guys even look to see if anything that she said was legitimate? Did you even have a check, right? And I had a check. I had a check long before actually Leslyn Lewis was even talking about this. So, the fact of the matter is that there is a WHO pandemic treaty. That's a fact. Anybody can look it up. Is it necessarily a nefarious thing? No, we don't know because it hasn't been drafted yet. So we don't know what's going to be in it. But it's definitely worth keeping an eye on because there's no doubt that the WHO made serious missteps in how they handled the pandemic. So of course, if they want us to sign on to some sort of an international treaty, we should approach it with caution, right? That's fair. The other thing is that it's funded by the National Institutes of Health Research. Those are the consultants. The consultants are mostly founded by Bill Gates. That's a fact. Anybody can look it up. It's right on Wikipedia. Press Progress didn't even bother to look at it, though. And after I pointed all of this out and said, no, Leslyn Lewis is not a complete nutcase. Let's not freak out yet, but let's follow this with caution and understand what we're signing into if we're going to sign up for it. And they promptly blocked me afterwards. Right. And so Press Progress is widely retweeted by a lot of Liberal and NDP members and members of our House of Commons. Right. So it's a huge concern that they're not even fact checking their own articles when they're supposed to be the fact checkers.
So they won't fact check their own articles, but they need to gatekeep the podcasting industry because of alleged misinformation in our industry.
Yeah, basically, right? So, I mean, who's fact checking the fact checkers now? I mean, the podcasters are, right? That's what we're here doing today. So, I can fact check this article on podcasting for you and we can go through it. But I mean, it's a little bit ironic that two people that, were known misinformation spreaders are saying that, podcasters are, the basis of all evil and the source of disinformation in our country. It's a little bit wild for them to come out saying that, right? When their stories were used in a very, very harmful way by the government to crack down on protesters. That's a pretty dark place to be going, right?
Well, do you think that because there's such a low barrier to entry for podcasting that these journalists feel a little, I don't know, I don't want to say intimidated, but they see that anyone with a microphone and some software and an RS feed can get a podcast and talk about things where they went to journalism school and they applied for a job and they are, working for this big legacy media corporation. Do you think that they feel threatened by all the podcasts out there? I mean, look at Joe Rogan's podcast. They even, in this article, they talk about Joe Rogan and his explosion in popularity. Do you think that there's some sort of, professional animosity here?
Yeah, I would say it probably would be. I mean, it's a threat to their monopoly of information gatekeeping, right? Like for them, this is not really, this is not what they would want, competition, But the one thing that I found interesting, what Ling said, was that it's very cheap. You just, like you said earlier, Russell, it's very cheap to get into this. You just have to have a microphone. It doesn't cost a lot of money. But I mean, if you think about it in this way, it's really almost the most democratic time in history where anybody's voice can be heard. I mean, you have to have listeners, obviously, but you don't have to go through the gatekeepers. You don't have to go through the narrative. Anybody can speak, right? So to me, it's like, can you get a more, every voice counts. Can you get a more democratic way than this?
What do you think, Andy? Do you think that journalists, feel threatened by the podcasting industry?
Yeah, I mean, I think absolutely, because there's so many of us now, right? There's so many alternative media news sources. So absolutely it's threatening because we're pulling away from their audience. They're losing their revenue, right? They're struggling, right? They're relying on government handouts and subsidies just to operate. But I mean, the stunning thing in all of this, I think, is that it's just a complete lack of self-awareness. In the case of this article, is why are people seeking out alternative news sources, right? Why? Could it be because we're not doing the kind of reporting that, that people want to hear, right? Is that why? So, I mean, they have to understand that they've actually created this phenomenon, right? And, it's not something that people did. Like I said, I didn't ever think I was going to be here, right? But here I am. But I mean, it was created out of a need and a desire for, deeper digs into news and things like that. So, I mean, they have to understand that they've actually fueled this machine, right? And by fueling this machine, they've actually injured their own industry, because people are turning to podcasts like this, right? And not turning on the 6 o'clock news. So, I mean, yeah, and I just want to read a quote about Justin Ling, because of course, after the convoy, journalists held a pity party for themselves. They called it Journalists Under Siege panel, da, da, da. So Justin Ling was there. So I'm just going to read what Justin Ling said after he put out misinformation. And he also put out misinformation about the Ottawa arson, right? He spread that story far and wide, that truckers tried to burn down a building and commit a mass murder. And, now, of course, we know that the truckers had nothing to do with it, right? These were two individuals who acted on their own. So anyways, this is what Justin Ling said. So Justin Ling, freelance investigative journalist, agreed with Trin. Ling specializes in covering extremist groups, like, say, Diagolon, maybe? And from this experience, he said he understood the convoy had nothing to do with anti-vax groups. Instead, he said the convoy supporters were from extremist and conspiracy theory groups. So what he said is that these people don't believe the media, and that's what makes them so dangerous. So he thinks that if you don't believe every word that he says, you're dangerous. But you know what? You shouldn't believe every word that he says. You shouldn't believe every word that I say, or every word that Russell says, or any word that anybody says, right? You should always be doing your own assessments, and trying to, find truth, right? And like I said, truth isn't a monolith, right? Somebody else's truth might be different than my truth. Yes, I did say Diagolon. Oh my God. And we can talk about Diagolon if you want. I saw that. Sorry, I saw that comment. So, truth isn't a monolith. We're constantly searching. I'm always searching for my own truth, right? I'm not just taking anybody's word for granted. I don't take anybody's word for granted. I'm always researching. I'm always fact checking to find my own truth, right? And I think that the truth that I've constructed is pretty good. So you know what, Justin Ling, I'm not dangerous because I'm searching out alternative media sources, right? And that doesn't make journalism under siege. That makes the people holding, journalists to account the way that we used to, right? And if journalists were doing their jobs properly, if they were holding government to account, right, like they used to, they wouldn't be in the situation that they're in right now. They wouldn't be under fire, they wouldn't be under siege, and they wouldn't have any competition from podcasters. But here we are, right? And like I said, they created it themselves.
I mean,
Now, when it comes to this idea, COVID-19 misinformation, and I have a couple of episodes where I talked about COVID-19 with some other people, and I noticed that when I go into Spotify, it says find out more information about COVID-19, and it kind of puts this label on the episode. So an AI bot at some point scanned through either my entire episode or probably most likely my show notes and tagged it, and then tagged it for this sort of this quote at the bottom of the episode. When it comes to COVID-19, everyone has got something wrong at some point about COVID-19. So why does it seem to be that some creators and podcasters, Joe Rogan, for example, talks about it, and there's this incessant need to fact check, but other people, they talk about it, and even though later on they're what they talked about was proven to be false, whether through ignorance or through purposeful, and their episodes aren't being censored. Is there like a double standard that you find?
yeah, for sure there is. I mean, mainstream media doesn't seem to have the same scrutiny as smaller platforms like our podcast or whatever. The idea, though, I mean, you can have misinformation from mainstream media, you can have misinformation from podcasts. We still have to think and be critical thinkers, but that seems to be lost nowadays, and that's one of the problems. I should be the only source of information. I'm the authority. It's really a call to authority in a sense. Like, I'm the only good source. It's very hubristic. I don't understand why people can't critically think and take the good pieces from everything, and also accept that along the path to finding out what the truth is, you're going to make mistakes. You're not always born. You're never born knowing everything perfectly 100%. So in order to discover the truth, you really do need to make mistakes and risk making mistakes.
Yeah. I mean, the COVID censorship is, it's real, right? And it's coming out in lawsuits in the States now. Of course, I was deplatformed along with Michael Sanger. Michael Sanger was somebody who was suing Twitter in the United States. So we talk a lot about that and what's going on. So we know, I mean, Joe Rogan, I haven't agreed with everything that Joe Rogan said. Some things I'm just kind of like, whoa, Joe, whoa, hold it. But again, that's me being able to, that shows that people are able to self-police what information they accept and what information they reject, right? We don't need a framework. We don't need people saying, this is the ministry of truth. We're going to tell you what the absolute truth is, right? I'm able to look at this podcast and say, "Ooh, Joe, don't go there," right? But he does also do great work, right? Like, he had Mark Zuckerberg on there from Facebook, and we heard that Facebook was altering algorithms to suppress, some stories during election time. So I mean, there's great value in stuff like that and what he does. And like I said, I mean, I think you have to understand you don't have to go along for the whole ride, right? But try the ride, right? See if you glean what you glean from it. And I think it's really important is that, we are able to self-police, right? To filter out what we determine, what we think is misinformation, what we think is true information. I mean, I get a lot of stuff sent to me where I'm like, no, I'm not buying into that, right? But we were told that sort of, the government and big tech colluded with governments, obviously, to censor some COVID information that they felt was misinformation, that's now been later, proven to be true, right? Things like, I mean, we were told what the vaccines they were going to prevent transmission, right? You weren't going to get it. All of these things, and these people were called conspiracy theorists. The scientists who said that that's not true, they were deplatformed, they were censored. And, who benefited? Well, I mean, again, when that happens, legacy media benefited from it, right? Because every time that somebody gets deplatformed or censored for misinformation, that's one less person that's got their voice pitching in saying, hold on here. And I mean, like I said, you don't have to buy into everything, right? Like, don't take everything, as big as Joe Rogan is, don't take everything he says as God's given truth, right? Because it's not. But he's finding truth, he's looking for it, at least. right? And a lot of people aren't looking for it. What they're doing is they're being spoon-fed it. And then they turn around and they spoon feed it to us, and they expect us just to swallow it, right? And take it at face value, and be like, okay, I'm not going to question this because it comes from a trusted source, our mainstream media. Well, I'm sorry, that's just not the case anymore. Anyways, I'm going to leave it there, but we can go more into that, and I can show you why you shouldn't trust necessarily the studies or the journalists, because there's an agenda, there's funding, and it's not always correct.
Well, I think when it comes to the legacy media, I look at back at the riots back in 2020, and you would see there would be a riot going on, and there would be the media, and they would be converging on a safe location to get a nice sanitized statement from the police chief. And they would be kind of in the background, just listening to what the police chief and the mayor and everyone else has to say. And meanwhile, you have independent journalists and bloggers and podcasters that would have body cameras on, and they would go into the actual riots and they would actually film what was actually going on there. Then these news agencies would then try to buy that footage from them. So really at the end of the day, who's doing all the work anymore? Because you have the media that were supposed to be our trusted source of, information, and they're just getting canned political statements, that have been sanitized, run through PR. But then you have these independents, they're going in there and they're actually getting the real story. They're actually getting on the ground footage that's actually making the difference. That's taking this narrative and turning it on its head. So the legacy media, to me, when they turn around and they say, well, podcasting is misinformation. Well, if you sit there and you simply just absorb what government and city officials are telling you, and you take that at face value, that's not really reporting. That's just being a mouthpiece for those government agents.
But imagine that, right? My competition is bad and wrong and whatever. Like, obviously, that's what they would want to play it out as. Competition's taking away their market share. So, but there's a reason why people are leaving mainstream media and going into podcasts. That's the whole point. People aren't trusting them. There's more and more people that are becoming distrustful of MSM, right? So, what do you expect to happen?
Yeah, I mean, I agree. Yeah, I'm just going to read this quote from Justin Ling in the article. So it says, the proliferation of a bunch of these podcasts touting everything from COVID-19 misinformation to pro-Russian propaganda to just general sort of far-right agitation, it's exploded in recent years, said Justin Ling, a freelance investigative journalist who covers disinformation and extremism. Well, I
Okay.
mean, I'm not sure how
Well,
great a job Justin is doing at covering the extremism. I've seen what he's putting out. I'm not going to say I'm a member of Diagolon, but I will say that there's a lot more to it. And they have to understand that they're being trolled at this point by this group. I don't necessarily agree with what the group does. I'm not a fan of Jeremy McKenzie. I think that what he does is borderline, dangerous stuff. And he has faced, some serious charges. So, but all of that, I mean, they've just taken this and they've just run with it. And again, this was used as, this was an extremist group that was running the convoy, and this was information that was used to enact the Emergencies Act. I mean, this is a bunch of dudes who ate edibles and dreamed up an imaginary country one night called Diagolon, right? And they're calling them a far right militia now. So I mean, like, I'm not sure, that this should be our trusted news source, right? I mean, Jonathan Kay wrote a great article on. It was really funny. I think he called it like the diagonaloids or something like that. But talking about this, right? And so again, I'm not going to say that I agree with it, but I mean, um, you know, this is what our mainstream media is running with, right? And a lot of this, it has this, there's a common thread, and it's always about the far right. It's always about anti-hate, and it always ends in censorship, right? That's like the stream of events, right? So we have a far right. Here's the proof that there's a far right extremist group. And now we need to censor the internet and information. And you know what? Who benefits from censorship bills? Guess what? Legacy broadcasters benefit from them. When you take down podcasters and things like that, when you want to control the stream of information, legacy media benefits, right? And we know that our legacy media is struggling right now. And are there podcasts that are disinformation? Yeah, absolutely. Right? Sure, there are. But you know what? We have free speech. And again, I think it's really important that people are able to do their critical thinking for themselves, especially in light of the fact that we have massive failures in our media as of late. So, yeah, anyways, that was just, I thought that was interesting that he said that. If he's a specialist in extremism, I don't know.
Well, what does far right even mean anymore?
Oh my God.
I always hear far right, far right, far right. Right here, far right agitation. Well, what about far left agitation and that? I mean, we saw plenty of it. We saw the results of far left agitation, for the last couple of years. It's unbelievable that every single time there's something that someone disagrees with, the boogeyman is brought out. Alt right, far right. Those
Trump.
words have lost all meaning. The actual extremists out there are laughing because these what these labels are associated with have absolutely no bearing anymore on reality.
Exactly. And I mean, they even reference in the article, oh my God, Alex Jones is profiting. Well, who just got $600 million a few years ago? The legacy media. So everybody's kind of making their money somehow in a way, right? But it's not like there's a monopoly anyways, is what I'm getting at, which is good.
Yeah, so I wanted to go through, so this is some of the fact checking that I wanted to do on this article. So I want to go into somebody who's quoted here. This is going to be a little bit of a dive, guys. Sorry, just try to stick with me. It's a pretty tangled little web. So the guy is called Ahmed Al-Rawi. And so what he does is he runs something called the Disinformation Project. Okay, so this is what he does. He studies disinformation. So here's what he said, and here's what they quoted in the article. So he said many podcasters and live streams will post links to their broadcasts across various social media platforms. But the actual content and the misinformation is hosted on another platform, which social media giants will find very difficult to moderate. So I think it's very clear what Al-Rawi thinks, right? He thinks that all of this should be regulated. Well, I'm going to tell you a little story about Al-Rawi, okay? So Al-Rawi, like I said, he runs something called the Disinformation Project. He did a study. Sorry, I've got to just find the study here. Where are we? Okay, so here it is. This is a study, okay? So he did a study. It's called the Methodological Challenges of Studying Fake News. Okay, so he did this study, and he particularly targeted Rebel News. He targeted two groups. He targeted Rebel News and he targeted Global Research. Now, Global Research, of course, also employed Laith Marouf, who was, wrapped up in the controversy because, obviously he made some awful anti-Semitic comments, but still hasn't been taken to task by our Ministry of Truth or the Ministry of Heritage, however you want to refer to them. I prefer to refer to them as Ministry of Truth nowadays because it seems like that's what they want to do. So anyways, so this is his study. And so in this study, what he did is he targeted Rebel News. He said that he analyzed 400 tweets between Rebel and Global, and he ranked them as to whether or not they were disinformative and disinformation. And so the finding of these studies in a nutshell said that 71% of Rebel's top news stories examined contained some sort of falsehood. Okay. And so in his study, he quoted a specific tweet that Rebel News put out. And so I've got the tweet here. So this is it. I hope you guys can all see this, but I'm going to read it anyway. So this is the tweet that they quoted specifically in this study, and they use this as an example, as proof of disinformation. So the tweet is, shock video. Ezra Levant just saw Omar Khadr on his Air Canada flight, and the Halifax police threatened to arrest him if he didn't shut up about it. And so the essence of this tweet is that the assumption was that Omar was on a no-fly list, right? And, his sister was on a no-fly list. We already know that. So the assumption was that he was on a no-fly list. So this study determined that this tweet was misinformation because Omar was presumed to be on a no-fly list. Here's the problem, though. It's not misinformation at all, because Maclean's wrote an article on it, and here it is. And in the article, they specifically say, it's entirely possible, if not probable, that the 29-year-old is on Canada's no-fly list. And his own lawyer, Omar Kadar's lawyer, goes on to say, hold on, let me just find it. Hold on here. Even his own lawyer thinks he likely fits the criteria for a no-fly list. Okay, at least technically speaking. I am guessing, frankly, that Omar is on the no-fly list, Whitling tells Maclean's. So this is his own lawyer saying he's likely on a no-fly list. So this was a perfectly reasonable assumption for Ezra to make, right? Even when Omar Kadar's own lawyer said he's on a fly list. And so this is what the study based its facts on, right? Saying that these tweets are misinformation. Rebel News is putting out misinformation. I'm sorry, it wasn't misinformation at all. Omar Kadar's own lawyer confirmed it, and so did Maclean's. They thought the exact same thing, that he was on a no-fly list. It was a perfectly reasonable thing for people to think. So this is who they're quoting in Global News' article, right? The guy that does this study, who apparently is a disinformation expert, right? This is the guy who's supposed to be fact-checking disinformation, totally missed that, blew that off, slandered Rebel News when it was a totally reasonable thing for them to think, right? So I have huge issues when they quote these so-called experts who are supposed to be fact-checking. They didn't even fact-check their own facts here, right? I mean, it's bonkers. I'm sorry.
So what happens in that gap then, really? Like, see, this is what I find is interesting. They get to operate in this gap where they can say something that is potentially false or partially false, and then it gets disseminated through their channels. And then by the time it's proven to be not true or partly not true, well, it doesn't matter. The story has moved on, right? So they get away with this gap where they can send out this kind of garbage, and get away with it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Like I said, this study was specifically quoted. This exact study was quoted in the Global News article. So it said in a peer-reviewed article Al Rawi co-authored, he analyzed a sample of the top 400 articles from outlets, Global Research and Rebel News, that were shared on Twitter and Facebook, right? And then they said 71% of them were false. So, I mean, I just went and proved to you that I have huge issues with the study. I don't know what 400 tweets they analyzed, but the one that they chose as the hallmark, they only chose 2 to put in their study. So the one that they chose for Rebel News was basically information that was actually put out by Maclean's and Omar Kadar's own lawyer, right? So I'm sorry, these are the experts. Now here's the fun part about the study, okay? I'm gonna tell you more about the study. So the study is funded by, of course, the Ministry of Heritage, right? We all knew that was coming. So the study was funded by the Ministry of Heritage, right? So, Pablo Rodriguez. It was also funded by, there's two other bodies that funded it. So there's the SSHRC. So the SSHRC, here they are. Here's what they do. So it's a government body, right? Social Science and Humanities Research Council. There they are, right? So this is who's funding this apparent, disinformation fact checkers. And, this is what they do. They research online disinformation, right? The other body that did it is the Digital Citizens Initiative. These guys. So the Digital Citizens Initiative, this is a really fun thing. So what they do, so they received $20 million in the last budget or to start up. They keep on receiving more money, so it's hard to figure out exactly how much they've received. So the Digital Citizens Initiative funds something called the Digital Democracy Project. And there's other subgroups, what they do. So they dole out funding to fund disinformation studies, things like this, right? Which I just proved was probably not right. Okay. So the Digital Citizens Initiative is run by a man called Pierre-Marc Perrault. So Pierre-Marc Perot, he's funny. He testified with the ethics in front of the ethics committee by Stephen Guilbeault's side when Stephen Guilbeault's side ran the Ministry of Truth, and he testified on behalf of censorship bill C10. So he thought that this was a good thing, right? He was right by Stephen Guilbeault's side, testifying in front of the ethics committee, saying that the censorship bill was 100% ethical. So really, really interesting that, this funding, and Blacklock's did a fantastic story on this digital citizens initiative as well. So she found that they were funding our mainstream media journalists to go on vacations to get training on how to properly cover our elections, right? Properly, right? Because there's a proper way to cover elections. And so they were getting these funded vacations, right, to go away and get this election coverage, education, re-education is what I would call it. Anyways, and so, this is all funded by the Ministry of Heritage. There's so many of these groups, right? It's just bonkers. Now, when you look at the Digital Citizens Initiative, most of their funding, I tried to find out where they're actually doling their money out. So a lot of it goes to Concordia University and their journalism project. So the fun thing about Concordia University is that their dean of political science actually has attended state dinners with Justin Trudeau. He actually set his table at a state dinner. Like, that's weird. I'm sorry. He like literally set his table for him to have dinner at a state dinner. So I mean, this is where the money goes. This is where it flows, right? And like I said, it's all circular. It all comes back to the same thing. They want to regulate stuff like this, right? What we're doing right now. They don't like it, right? They don't want it out there. They want it regulated. They want to be able to take this stuff down, right? If they deem it's harmful.
Well, when they were, I talked with Maxime Bernier about Bill C10 at the time, and I've talked with a few other people about, Bill C11 as the new iteration. And one of the things that was said is that they want to promote Canadian content that I believe it said something about social cohesion, something about, promoting Canadian values and social cohesion. I'd have to look that up, but it really, really reeks of, we will decide what is going to be promoted and what won't. I've heard with a few artists saying that, if my content is content that doesn't necessarily toe the government line, am I going to get deboosted on these platforms, YouTube and Facebook, and will Rumble and Odyssey even be allowed on, in Canada? There's a lot of talk, about digital gatekeeping and soft locking Canadian content out from the world. I watched some of the proceedings with Bill C11, and it was like a feeding frenzy. All these media companies were lined up, wanting more money, wanting more influence, and not talking about how they hate having to compete with these other places. JG McCullough was up there. He was the only one that was actually up there that I could see that was actually defending independent content creators. Everyone else, it was like pigs at the trough up there, just, trying to get their extra money, talking about how they need to make sure that Canadian content, the content that they put out is ranked higher on, different media platforms and things like that. And it all ties back, I agree, to this whole idea that podcasting, because it's so decentralized, anyone can start a podcast. Anyone that's listening right now, if you have a microphone, you can make an account and you can start podcasting, and you can gain a following and go from there. The media, they have to go to school. They have to get regulated by CRTC, although they're pretty much toothless to actually do anything. And they are in a way bound by certain rules that podcasters aren't.
Yeah, the one interesting thing too that you saw, I mean, kind of along the line here, was how mainstream media, not mainstream media, but social media teamed up with the government. It becomes this circular thing that, oh, you don't want to be regulated, you better do something about this. I don't like what's being said. Then things get censored, let's say, but you can bypass what the laws of the country are just by getting the private company to do it. But I mean, when you link private companies with the government, I mean, there's a term for that. It's pretty much the definition of fascism, right? So it's pretty much a very dangerous path to go down, where no voices can be heard and only the approved voices can be heard.
Well, and not only that, in this article that Rachel Gilmore wrote, she mentions about AM radio being the original source of misinformation, disinformation, and how it leads to all sorts of, radicalization. Well, when I was younger, I used to listen to AM radio, and every night Coast to Coast came on. And that show was all about people talking about aliens, people talking about secret government agents, all sorts of crazy stuff, lizard people, adrenochrome, all that sort of stuff, right? Everyone knows that's for entertainment. Anyone that's an adult that is of sound mind knows that, you can listen to it. And if you agree or disagree, you can kind of go from there. You're an adult. But this whole idea that, well, it's misinformation and we have to police it. Well, again, you're nanny stating it. You're taking away my ability to listen to something and say, okay, well, this guy's talking about how, you know, this all the presidents are lizard people. I can look at that and say, well, they're probably not. And I can say, okay, this is entertainment. I got a good laugh out of it, but I know it's entertainment. And if someone chooses to believe that all the major political figures are actually lizards that crawled up from the sea, then that's on them. And they'll have to be able to justify that.
Well, they
But
might be lizard people.
who
You
knows?
don't know that for sure.
There's something all right.
Yeah, I just wanted to jump in. Yeah, I can remember that remark about social cohesion. And I remember Blacklock's Holly Doan said, I haven't heard that term social cohesion since I was reporting in China. So it is, it's a very dark term. It means, we want you to conform to this. Don't step over the line. Don't think for yourselves, right? We know best, basically, right? Don't think for yourselves. I mean, it's really, I find it really, it's the destruction of critical thinking, right? Because, like I said, I mean, if I if I didn't think critically, like if I didn't look at some of these articles, I mean, I never would have found out that, that there was this study, that was actually, the tweet that they used by Rebel News was actually confirmed by Maclean's magazine as well. So, and it's not that you shouldn't, again, you shouldn't take everything at face value, right? Like they mentioned Jordan Peterson. I like Jordan Peterson. Of course, he went to bat for me. But I don't take everything he says as the word of God either, right? It really is. But what they're saying when they're saying, we want social cohesion and things like that. What they're really saying is, we want to destroy critical thinking. We want to be your ministry of propaganda, right? And you're going to get the sole source of truth from us. And that's a very, very dangerous place for any democracy to go. Yeah, I mean, so Justin, what else did Justin Ling here? He said, challenge their ideas as necessary, call them out. In some cases, for being what they are. In many cases, they're just charlatans who are doing this to make a buck. Or in some cases, dangerous ideologues that need to be called out. So, I mean, I would agree with some of that. I don't think that most podcasters are charlatans looking to make a buck. If you're making a living off of podcasting, I'm sorry, you're doing much, much better than I'm doing. And good for you, but I mean, and I think that most people who do what they do, I don't think that they're trying to spread dangerous ideologues necessarily. I think that there are a lot of people like us who are looking for, for an alternative source of media, for some truth, right? Yeah, and it was interesting too, that other quote by Justin Ling about the pro-Russian propaganda. And this is something that we've really seen ramping up in our country and in our mainstream media, is all this pro-Russian propaganda. Of course, we all know that I was put on a study, unfortunately, saying that my account on Twitter was linked to pro-Russian propaganda. I had some good talks with the author, and he agreed that perhaps I was put on that list incorrectly. But yeah, I mean, so this is another funding initiative that went out from the Ministry of Heritage. Pablo Rodriguez just shot out $2.5 million to combat Russian propaganda in Canada. I mean, CBC has been the most widespread disseminator of Russian propaganda, as far as I can tell. I mean, they said flat out that the convoy was caused by, they thought it was Russian agents, maybe. So, I mean, this is a little bit funny, right? These are supposed to be our trusted news sources. So, yeah, but it's really, really interesting. They're coming out really hard on that. And they announced that funding right after the study was put out. And the study is full of independent journalists, right? People like me. And I kind of laughed it off at first. And I thought, yeah, whatever. I'm a Russian propagandist, right? I mean, I'm Ukrainian. I've got family in Ukraine, for Pete's sakes. I certainly don't put out any pro-Russian propaganda. But, when I actually looked at it, I thought, this is actually a little bit darker than, I shouldn't really be laughing it off, because they're going to use this study. And they did use this study. And now they're putting out funding to fight Russian propaganda, which apparently I'm a part of. And so is Rupa Subramania, Ezra Levant, Maxime Bernier, Glenn Greenwald, Tulsi Gabbard. We're all on this list, right? So, I mean, and the other thing, I mean, is this really the biggest concern in our country? We've got a Russian propaganda, anti-Russian propaganda campaign going. I mean, we've never looked at the Iran lobby in Canada, which is extensive. I just pointed out some of the Iran propaganda being put out the other day. Some of our people from the Macdonald-Laurier Institute have been fired at by this Iranian group that, parrots Khomeini's, talking points. And, we've got a huge, Chinese propaganda issue as well. When I put out the Uyghur report that the UN put out, I put out sort of the most shocking excerpts from it, the most horrifying details from that report. And the report was horrifying. A whole group came after me. They're called the Kyo Collective. And they have a huge following. They've got 56,000 followers on Twitter. So they're basically as big as me. And they started putting out all these pro-Beijing talking points on that post. And saying that the Uyghur genocide is a myth. They gave me all these articles that they wrote. And I was like, who is behind this group, right? This is a huge issue. These people have a massive following. And it's all pro-Beijing, right? It's very, very scary. And nobody's even looking into these groups, right? And I'm sorry, I haven't seen anything of that magnitude on the Russian side of things. But this funding coincidentally came out right after this study came out, right? So it's like, okay, we've got Russian propaganda. Our independent journalists are on it. Let's fund an anti-Russian propaganda, initiative in our country to hunt down these independent journalists and find out what they're doing. And let's totally ignore, the Iranian and Chinese propaganda that goes on in our country, and that influence, even though it's much, much greater in magnitude. So kind of wild. It just doesn't make a lot of sense. Yes, CCP is, yes, I agree with you. I'm not going to repeat that word, but absolutely. So, there's so many of these groups out here. We're attacking, JJ McCullough, okay? That's what we're doing in our House of Commons. We're not even looking at these massive groups that actually are disseminating very, very harmful disinformation, right? And they're out there. There's a lot of them that are doing it. But no. Let's pick on independent broadcasters, right? Let's pick on podcasters. I mean, it's just
Well, even talking, about this idea of picking on podcasters, well, generally the picking seems to be on one side of the political spectrum, the right side of the political spectrum. They're the ones that need to be policed. They're the ones that need to be reined in. They're the Russian disinformation propagandists because they have an ideology that doesn't meet the current mainstream narrative. The problem is, you look at Ben Shapiro, for example. He co-founded Daily Wire. Daily Wire goes to Pod Movement 2022, where they paid for a booth. So they've paid a sum of money to be there. He shows up, and next thing you know, Pod Movement 2022 is putting out this big thread saying, "We're so sorry, we'll never have him here ever again." Well, you were happy to take his money. You were happy to open the door as long as he didn't walk through it. And that's the problem, is that this whole policing of podcasting and that, it just puts people into different camps more and more, because the podcasting that gets policed is the more right-leaning conservative podcasting. So then they go and they join Daily Wire or some more right-leaning podcasting network, and the information just becomes more and more of an echo chamber. And that to me worries me, because I think that's where the extremists can actually slip into, because when everyone's operating out of an echo chamber, that's not good for anyone.
No, you're right. If you shove somebody into a closet, it doesn't change who they are. They're still going to be what they are, but they're not going to have their voice heard. They can't be part of society. It's not a good thing. But you're right. They always want to seem to make the far right as the boogeyman, like we said earlier, and anything that doesn't follow the narrative. Oh, there we go. You must be a Trump person, like what they're doing with Poilievre, right? Oh, he must be a Trump guy. Like he's a Trump guy. It doesn't even matter what the truth is. He may be, he may not be, but it doesn't matter what the truth is. We don't like him. He has potential to defeat us. So he's Trump, or he's the far right, or whatever the label of the day is. It's pretty sad.
Well, they seem really, really worried about gatekeeping. Like right here in the article, the result, your message could go right to the listener's ears about gatekeepers. Why do we need gatekeepers? Who are the gatekeepers? Why do we need them? I, as the listener, I can listen to something and I can say, you know what? Um, this is a little too far for me. I'm not going to listen to this anymore. Or maybe I listen to it, I'm like, this person is absolutely out to lunch and it's hilarious. I'm going to keep listening to it because I can't believe anyone could be this far out to lunch. That's my right as someone that's utilizing the internet, that's utilizing that sphere, is to listen to these things and say, yeah, it's for me or it's not for me. I don't need Justin Ling. I don't need Bill C11. I don't need anyone to police what I'm going to listen to on the internet.
Oh, you're not
We
wrong.
already have laws. We have hate speech laws. We have slander laws. We have libel laws. We don't need anyone else there. If something truly is hate speech, then it already falls under that legislation. If something really is slander or libel, well, we have civil recourse. And guess what? It's part of a podcast. You can take a copy of it and you can bring it to court and then have the judge decide from there. I don't understand why we need to have these journalists and these organizations funded by the Canadian government telling us what we need to listen to or not listen to.
Even in the article, a little lower there, you have Carmen Celestine saying, and it doesn't matter what you do, you can seep back into the platform and find who you want. Imagine being free to associate and listen to what you want. Like, how is that a bad thing? I don't understand why they're like, oh my God, we need to stop it, but they're going to be able to find this again, and then we can't control it. And as well, guess what? We're all grown-ups. We can make our own decisions. If it becomes a problem, there are laws in place, like you just mentioned. So I don't know. It's mind blowing.
Yeah, I totally agree. Well, I think the reason that they've latched onto this again is, it's a government agenda. They want to regulate the internet. And like I said, it all leads back to Bill C11, and Bill C11 just leads back to benefiting legacy broadcasters, right? So they've got a very vested interest in seeing this legislature pass, so that they can become more of a sole source of news. Other competitive podcasters are taken down, right? If you do something controversial, if you step over the line, if you make a mistake, or if you say something incorrect, you could get your podcast pulled. So I mean, that's all very, very beneficial. So that's why they're pushing it, right? It always comes back whenever they use these polls. I mean, I deconstructed a lot of polls. Almost all the pollsters in Canada have blocked me. There's only one who didn't block me. Fournier didn't block me. He actually did block me, but he unblocked me because I said, Fournier, what's up? You pulled me on the federal election, right? Like, what's going on here? And I've never come out at your polls, actually. So unblock me. And he actually did unblock me. Good guy. But anyways, yeah, I mean, Nick Nanos. I looked really extensively at Nick's polls. So Nick's done a lot of work with these race-based groups that receive a lot of funding. There's one called the CRRF. So they did a poll with the Anti-Hate Network. They're run by somebody who was chosen. The director was chosen by, of course, the Ministry of Heritage, or the Ministry of Truth, as I like to call them. So what they did is they ran polls, and their polls were like, do you believe that online hate is a problem? And of course, a majority of respondents said yes. And so they use this information to say, well, yes, then we need to police the internet. Well, who benefits? Well, guess what? Nick Nanos, who runs Nanos Research, who did this poll, he's an expert for CTV, right? So he gets paid to be an expert for CTV. CTV then runs the polls. And, guess who benefits when, if you say that we need online harm legislation, again, legacy broadcasters benefit. So, it's just a big circular swamp. And whenever you look at these experts, these studies, these polls, like I said, I looked into, Ahmed Al-Rawi, his disinformation project, his study, very, very quickly debunked it, so that there are massive problems with it. But, nobody's looking at it in mainstream media. They just go, oh, does this benefit me? Does this information benefit me? Does this study say something in it that I want it to say? Yes. Okay, let's run with it, right? Let's not actually look at it. And like I said, I have serious questions. I'm going to actually try to request all 400 tweets that they analyzed. I want all 400 tweets that they went through that they said were disinformation from Global Research and Rebel News, because I think it would be really interesting to go through those tweets and find out how much of them were actually disinformation. I'd like to do my own study and see if 71% were disproven or untrue, like they said, because like I said, their hallmark tweet, right? The one that they decided to put in the study that was massive information was confirmed by Maclean's. Right. So I'd love to do that. But, this is the sort of stuff that nobody does anymore. They just don't look at it. They just are like, does this information work for me? Okay, I'm going to plop it into my article because, it massages my confirmation bias, tells me what I want to hear. I'm not going to even read the study or look at the study that closely. Not going to question it because it's an expert. Right. It works for me, and it works for my agenda, and it works for my industry. So I'm going to use it.
Well, they come to the conclusion first, and then they find the evidence that backs up their conclusion. They go the opposite direction. Now we're coming up on the hour here. So one of the last things I kind of wanted to touch on was they say, what can be done to stop the spread of misinformation? That was kind of one of the things they said. And they, there's a lot of talk about reporting and things like that. But I want to ask you a different question. And that is, what do you think we need to do to keep the internet open and free for everyone?
That's a tough call, actually. I think there's going to be a lot of VPN sales coming along here. Hard to say. It really is hard to say. I mean, when the government is pointing their gun at you and controlling everything you can have access to, then you have a really tough battle. Your reach as a person can be maybe only verbally with other people that you can run into, but the internet is such a big platform that little people can get a big voice. If they take that away, I mean, I don't know how you're going to get around it.
What do you think, Andy?
Yeah, well, I think it's really, unfortunately, we're just gonna have to see where these bills go. I don't think that they're gonna give up. We know. I said, of course, immediately after the convoy that Justin Trudeau's number one priority because of because of the way that mainstream media totally, in my mind, like they completely blundered and butchered the news for the freedom protests. And independent journalists, we had sort of a David and Goliath battle going on, but the little people really won the day in that misinformation war. We really did. We disproved most of their stuff. So I said, his number one priority after that was going to be to censor the internet. I wrote an article on it. I said he's made it very, very clear throughout his European tour as he talks about misinformation and things like that. And so, of course, now, it is their number one priority. It's going to be the first thing that they want to do. So, it's really up to our parliamentarians. We've got a lot of great MPs who are standing up. We have to be, I'm not sure if they're going to be able to defeat this bill or not. We'll see. But, Michael Geist, great. Really, really at the forefront. You have to understand how deep too, and we could almost do a whole show on this, just on the lobbying behind this bill, right? Like we've got Mr. Ma, who works for Facebook, lobbying behind this bill. There's so many. Big tech is lobbying, rallying behind sort of this bill a little bit. So, because the thing is that when government says that we're going to create our own disinformation expert, our own panel that will police the internet for us, then big tech gets off the hook a little bit, right?
What a terrifying thought. A
They're
panel
not
of people to police the internet. Like that doesn't reek of commissar type of sanctioning of what's appropriate or not. I don't know what does.
Did you ever see the show on Netflix, How to Become a Tyrant? It's like 6 episodes talking about some of the biggest, evil people from the last century or whatever. And it's unbelievable when you see what they did then. And they have updated versions with the internet and everything now that they didn't have those tools back then. But there are so many parallels. It's really uncanny. I did an episode on that one, and I said, holy moly! I watched the episode with my kids, and it's remarkable what common things are happening between the past and the present. Like history does repeat itself in that sense.
No, definitely 100%. My advice is, if you want to support a free and open internet, is you should always follow and like and subscribe to your favorite content creators online. Definitely give them reviews and help them with their exposure, because the more exposure they get, the more difficult it is to wipe them from the face of the internet. So definitely want to thank you, Brian, for coming on to the show today. Andy Lee, thank you so much for doing all the background information. And that, I'll give you each a minute to plug your social medias and kind of any last words, and then we'll end the show. Brian, starting with you.
Awesome. Thank you. I mean, you can find me, you can see the handle there on my screen section there at Memory Hole Show. And I put the website up, memoryholeshow.com. You can see my show notes there and just listen to the podcast episodes or subscribe whichever podcast brand you listen to.
Andy? Yeah, so most of you probably follow me on Twitter. That's my platform. It's my home. So I'm Real Andy Lee Show. And I also have a YouTube channel. It's very, very small right now. This will be on it, and all of our videos go on it, the videos that I do with Mark Petrone. So that's the Real Andy Lee Show on YouTube. I would really appreciate it if you would subscribe, because I do this for free, and I might be able to get some ad revenue one day to fund my journeys. I've got some journeys coming up. So that would be really, really great if people could go to my channel and subscribe. I would really appreciate that. And this was really fun. Somebody said, I just want to say this comment. Thanks for having these conversations while we still can. Let's hope it doesn't come to that. Let's hope that our parliamentarians do our job. They uphold democracy. I just want to end with a quote from this article. And again, this is from Justin Ling. So he says that these podcasts have the real potential to destroy the fabric of not just American democracy, but of democracy everywhere. So, I mean, that's a pretty stunning statement. So I asked you all to tune in. I asked people to come and to discover for themselves if podcasts are misinformation. So I hope that, if you watched, I hope that, you made your own deductions. Was this podcast misinformation? What do you think? Anyways, goodbye, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, everyone.